It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when my mail carrier, a cheerful young man named Eddie, who had delivered to my street for the past 6 years, knocked on my front door instead of just leaving my mail in the box. I remember thinking that was strange. Eddie never knocked. I opened the door, and he stood there holding a small stack of envelopes, his expression somewhere between uncomfortable and concerned. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, "I'm sorry to bother you, and I hope this doesn't come across as overstepping, but I've been meaning to say something for a few weeks now." I told him to go ahead. "Every Tuesday, when you're not home, I assume you're out because your car is gone, a young man comes to your mailbox before I even get here. He takes whatever's inside and leaves." He paused. "He has a key." I stood there for a moment, not quite understanding what I was hearing. "A young man," I repeated. "Late 20s, maybe 30, dark jacket usually. He knows what he's doing. He checks both ways before opening the box." I thanked Eddie, and I closed the door, and I stood alone in my front hallway with those envelopes in my hand, and a feeling in my chest that I can only describe as the floor dropping out from under you while the walls stay perfectly still. My name is Harriet. I'm 72 years old. I live in a pale yellow house on a quiet street in Dayton, Ohio, the same house where I raised my children and where my husband Dennis spent 38 years before his heart gave out 5 winters ago. I have a small vegetable garden on the south side of the house, a cat named Biscuit, who is 17 and arthritic, and a Tuesday routine that I have kept without fail since Dennis passed. I drive to the community center on Elm Street for the grief support group that helped me survive the worst year of my life, and afterward I stop at the pharmacy and sometimes at the grocery store. And I am usually gone from 10 in the morning until 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon. 4 hours every Tuesday, like clockwork. My nephew, my sister Pauline's youngest boy, had been helping me around the house since Dennis died. He was 31, between jobs more often than not, and I had always had a soft spot for him. He reminded me of Dennis when Dennis was young. Same broad shoulders, same easy smile. When Pauline called me after Dennis's funeral and asked if I might let him help out in exchange for a little money, I said yes without hesitating. He mowed the lawn. He helped me clean the gutters. He drove me to my eye appointment the winter my license was temporarily suspended. Somewhere along the way, without really thinking about it, I had given him a key. For emergencies, I told myself, in case something happened to me. I never considered that the emergency might be him. After Eddie knocked on my door that Tuesday, I didn't call my nephew. I didn't call Pauline. I didn't call anyone. I went to the kitchen, I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat at the table where Dennis and I used to eat breakfast together, and I thought very carefully about what I actually knew. My mail was being taken before Eddie arrived. My nephew had a key. He knew my schedule because he was the one who had started driving me to the community center last spring before I'd reclaimed my full license. He knew exactly when I left and when I came back. But knowing something and understanding it are two different things. I needed to understand it. The most confusing part in those first hours was the mail itself. What would anyone want from an old woman's mailbox in Dayton, Ohio? My mail was mostly medical explanation of benefits forms, the occasional alumni newsletter from the university where I had taught English composition for 22 years, grocery store circulars, and my bank statements. My bank statements. I keep paper statements because Dennis always did, and after he died, I couldn't bring myself to change anything that felt like his system. Every month, a statement from Heartland Federal comes in a white envelope with a little window in the front. I had not been looking at them carefully. I am ashamed to say that now, but it is the truth. After Dennis died, I set up automatic bill pay for everything that mattered, and I had gotten into the habit of opening the statements and filing them without reading the numbers the way I used to. It felt like one more thing I didn't have the energy for. I went to my filing cabinet that afternoon. I pulled out the last 8 months of statements. I sat down at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a yellow legal pad, and I started going through them line by line. It took me about 40 minutes to find the first one. A transfer, $240 to an account I didn't recognize. In February, I kept reading. March, $180, same account. April, $310, a different account this time. May, $260. The amounts were always different, never round numbers, never anything dramatic enough to set off an alarm in the back of my mind if I'd been skimming. 200 here, 300 there. The kind of numbers that could almost be a forgotten subscription, an automatic charge I'd set up and lost track of. By the time I finished going through all 8 months, I had a column of numbers on my legal pad that added up to just over $2,100. $2,100? I put my pen down. I looked out the kitchen window at the garden, at the last of the autumn tomatoes still on the vine, and I had what I can only describe as a moment of profound stillness. Not calm, stillness. The kind that comes right before something in you decides it has had enough. I did not sleep much that night. I spent most of it at the kitchen table with my laptop, a machine I had learned to use adequately but not fluently, trying to understand exactly what I was looking at. I called the bank's customer service line, and after 40 minutes on hold and 2 transfers, spoke to a woman named Diane who was patient and kind. She confirmed that the transfers had originated from my online banking portal. Someone had logged in and initiated them manually. "Do you recall setting up online banking?" she asked carefully. I told her yes, years ago, but I never used it. "Is it possible someone else has your login credentials?" I thought about the afternoon last spring when my nephew had sat at this very table with my laptop between us and said very casually that he wanted to help me get set up properly so I could check my balance without driving to the branch. He'd said the branch was going to start charging fees for teller visits, which I later learned was not true. He'd asked me to create a new password and watched me do it, offering suggestions when I fumbled with the keyboard. I had typed it in, and he had leaned forward to check that it was entered correctly. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. I told Diane I would need to file a dispute. She walked me through the process, flagged the account, and told me the bank would launch an investigation. She also told me that in cases of suspected unauthorized access, I should consider contacting local law enforcement. After I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. My nephew was family. He was Pauline's son. He used to bring me wildflowers when he was 7 years old, pulling them from the ditch on the way to our house, and presenting them to me with dirt still on his hands. I thought about that. I thought about Pauline's face if I called the police. I thought about Dennis, about what Dennis would have said. Dennis would have said, "Harriet, do what's right." The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and I bought a small indoor security camera. The young man in the electronics section, he couldn't have been more than 20, he showed me a model about the size of a hockey puck that could sit on a bookshelf and connect to my phone. He showed me how the app worked, right there in the aisle, with the patience of someone who had explained it to a great many older customers. I bought 2. One for the front hallway near the door, one for the small home office where I keep my filing cabinet and my laptop. That evening, I charged them both, set them up with his help over the phone, when I inevitably got confused about the Wi-Fi password, and placed them carefully. The hallway camera went on the shelf beside the coat rack, tucked between a framed photograph of Dennis and a ceramic cardinal that had been his mother's. The office camera went on the bookshelf behind my desk, angled toward the room. I set them to send motion alerts to my phone and to record continuously while motion was detected. Then I waited for Tuesday. My nephew called me on Sunday to check in, the way he did most weekends. His voice was warm and familiar. He asked how Biscuit was doing. He asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. I was fine. Everything was fine. I was not fine, but I was composed. Monday passed slowly. I watered the garden. I called my daughter in Columbus. My daughter Renata, who is 46 and practical and has my father's eyes. I didn't tell her what was happening because I didn't want to alarm her before I was certain. We talked about her youngest starting kindergarten and about whether she should repaint the kitchen. Normal conversation. The kind that anchors you when the ground beneath you has gone uncertain. Monday night, I barely slept again. I lay in the dark and I thought about the word betrayal. It has a particular weight when the person who has betrayed you is someone you loved. It doesn't feel like anger at first. It feels like grief. A second kind of grief, arriving without warning into a life that had already seen more of it than its share. On Tuesday morning, I followed my routine exactly. I made coffee, I fed Biscuit, I got my coat and my purse, and I backed my car out of the driveway at 9:55, the same as always. But I did not go to the community center. I drove 3 blocks to the dead-end street behind my neighborhood, parked behind a stand of oak trees where my car would not be visible from the main road, and I opened the app on my phone. Both cameras showed empty rooms. I sat in my car with the heat running, and I watched. At 11:17, the hallway camera picked up motion. I watched on my phone screen as the front door opened with a key. My nephew stepped into the hallway. He did not call out. He did not look around the way an innocent person might. He walked directly toward the office. He wasn't alone. A young woman came in behind him. I didn't recognize her. She was perhaps 25, slim, with her hair pulled back. She went straight to the coat closet while he went to the office, and she opened it and began going through the shelf where I keep the lockbox with my important documents. On the office camera, I watched my nephew sit down at my desk and open my laptop. My hands were shaking. I'm not ashamed of that. I sat in my car for the next 40 minutes, watching them work. The young woman found the lockbox. I had changed the combination 2 days prior and moved the valuable contents, and appeared frustrated when it didn't open. She put it back and moved to the kitchen, where I watched her go through my junk drawer with methodical focus. My nephew, at the desk, appeared to be attempting to access my bank account. He spent a long time typing. Whatever new password I had set up with the bank's help, he could not get in. At 12:02, he closed the laptop. He said something to the young woman, and they both moved toward the front door. He paused in the hallway, looked around the room in a way that made my stomach turn, checking that everything looked undisturbed, and they left. The front door closed. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes before I could make myself drive. I went directly to the Dayton Police Department. I want to be honest, I had expected going in to feel dismissed. I am 72 years old. I am well aware that older women reporting financial concerns are not always met with urgency. I prepared myself for polite skepticism and slow bureaucratic wheels. What I got instead was a detective named Osgood, maybe 50, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck, who listened to everything I said without interrupting once. I showed him the bank records. I showed him the footage from both cameras on my phone. I told him about Eddie, the mail carrier, and the key and the Tuesday schedule and all of it. He watched the footage twice. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, "I want you to do something for me before you leave today. I want you to change your locks, tonight if possible." I told him I already planned to. "And you haven't spoken to your nephew since Tuesday?" I said no. "Good. Don't. Let us handle the contact." He assigned a case number. He told me the bank fraud unit would be brought in. He asked if I had a local attorney, and when I said I had used Dennis's estate attorney, he suggested I call her that afternoon. He was thorough, and he was serious, and he did not make me feel foolish. even once, for having trusted someone I loved. I cried in the parking lot afterward, just for a few minutes. Then I called my daughter. Renata drove up from Columbus that same evening. She arrived at 6:30 with a bag of groceries and her characteristic expression, calm on the surface, furious underneath. She is her father's daughter in that way. She sat across from me at the kitchen table in the same chair I had sat in alone 2 weeks earlier, and she listened to everything, and then she was quiet for a moment. "How long did you know?" she asked. "Since Eddie knocked." "Why didn't you call me right away?" I thought about how to explain it. "Because I needed to be sure," I said, "and because once I told you, it would be real." She understood. I know she did, even though her jaw tightened. The locksmith came that evening and changed all the locks. Renata stayed the week. The investigation took 3 months. I won't pretend they were easy months. There were days I second-guessed everything. There were nights I thought about my nephew at 7 years old with those wildflowers, and I had to remind myself, carefully and firmly, that the person who entered my home with a key and sat at my desk trying to access my bank account was not that child. That somewhere between then and now, something had gone wrong in him, and that was a tragedy, his tragedy. But it did not cancel out what he had done. My sister Pauline called me in December. She had found out through the family the way things travel. The call was difficult. She was angry, and then she cried, and then she was angry again. I listened. I did not apologize. There is nothing I did that requires an apology. The district attorney's office filed charges in January: unauthorized computer access, identity fraud, and theft. The girlfriend, whose name I eventually learned, was charged as well. She had a prior record, something my nephew had neglected to mention to anyone in the family, including apparently his own mother. They both pled guilty in the spring. My nephew received 18 months of probation and was ordered to pay full restitution, $2,140, which was the precise figure from my legal pad. The girlfriend received a suspended sentence and a fine. The judge looked at my nephew during sentencing and said something I have thought about often since. She said, "You targeted someone who trusted you, and you used that trust as a tool. That is among the most corrosive things one person can do to another." I was sitting in the second row. I heard it clearly. That summer, I did several things. I set up a proper trust with Dennis's attorney to manage my finances going forward. My accounts are now structured so that any transfer above $100 requires dual verification, a code sent to both my phone and Renata's email. It took half an afternoon to set up, and I wish I had done it years ago. I called Eddie and brought him a tin of the lemon bars I make every Christmas. He seemed genuinely embarrassed by the fuss, which made me like him even more. I went back to my Tuesday group at the community center. The people there, some of them have been meeting every Tuesday for longer than I have, knew something had happened because I had missed several weeks. I told them the short version. The woman who sits across from me, who lost her husband 2 years before I lost Dennis, reached across the table and covered my hand with hers and didn't say anything. That was exactly right. I still have the security cameras. I have added a video doorbell. I am not ashamed of any of it. Here is what I have come to understand. In the years since Eddie knocked on my front door, vulnerability is not the same thing as weakness. I was vulnerable because I was alone and grieving, and I trusted the people I loved without asking enough questions. That is not weakness. That is what it means to be human. The weakness was elsewhere, and it was not mine to carry. What I did, quietly, alone, with a camera the size of a hockey puck and 40 minutes of recorded footage, I did myself. Dennis would have been proud of that, I think. He would have been quietly, stubbornly proud. Biscuit is still with me, by the way. 18 years old now and still claiming the warmest spot on the sofa as though it is a matter of constitutional right. Some things don't change, and some things, it turns out, need to. I still think about the tin of lemon bars I brought to Eddie that summer afternoon. He stood at his mail truck looking almost embarrassed, and I thought, this is what a good person looks like. Not dramatic, not expecting anything. Just someone who noticed something was wrong and decided it wasn't his business to stay quiet about it. That's the thing about actions and their consequences. They don't always arrive with a lot of noise. Sometimes they arrive as a knock on a front door on an ordinary Tuesday. My nephew made his choices over many months. Small ones at first, the kind that are easy to justify when you're the one doing the justifying. A transfer here, a password there. He told himself, I imagined that I wouldn't notice, that I was old, that I had more than I needed. Each small choice made the next one easier until what he was doing wasn't a slip anymore, it was a system, and systems eventually catch up with you. What I've come to understand is that the harm he did wasn't only financial. The $2,000 mattered, yes. But what he actually stole, what took far longer to recover, was my sense of safety in my own home. The feeling that the people I loved were who I believed them to be. You can get money back. You file the paperwork, the bank investigates, the court orders restitution, but the particular grief of discovering that someone you trusted was studying your schedule and using your kindness as a door left unlocked, that takes longer. It asks more of you. I had to make a choice in that process, too. I could have let it go. Pauline is my sister, and I love her, and I knew what pressing forward would cost that relationship, but I thought about what it would mean to let it go, not just for me, but for him. People who are not held accountable for the harm they cause don't generally stop causing it. They find a new door, a new schedule, a new person who trusts them a little too easily. Doing the right thing for my nephew, in the truest sense, meant not protecting him from the consequences of what he'd done. That required something I didn't know I still had in me at 72. The willingness to sit with discomfort and not flinch from it. To go to the police station alone. To tell Renata the truth even knowing she would worry. To sit in that courtroom in the second row and listen to the judge say what needed to be said. Dennis used to tell our kids that character is what you do when no one's watching. I think that's right. But I'd add something to it now. Character is also what you do when everything in you wants to look away. When looking away would be easier, quieter, less painful for everyone in the short term. My nephew looked away from his own conscience for months. I chose not to look away from mine. The camera I hid behind Dennis's photograph was a $20 piece of plastic. What it captured was worth far more than that. Not just as evidence, but as proof to myself that I was still capable of thinking clearly, acting deliberately, and seeing a problem through to the end without anyone holding my hand. I am 72 years old. I live alone. I have an arthritic cat and a vegetable garden and a grief support group that meets every Tuesday. And I am, it turns out, not nearly as easy to take advantage of as someone once believed. That is enough. That is more than enough.